within this decade, up into 2030, 2031 on the max, it's going to be probably one of the biggest overhauls planet Earth since it started. I mean, that's what everything's pointing to my understanding, and how it's paralleling within the generation concept, and also on the science side, the numbers are lining up. It makes me think of the wise men in those time frames who were deeply studying, 3 wise men, not too many, who were in their Magi clan, that they saw, and they were using so many different systems, and they saw, wow, you know what, there's something incredibly large that is happening. And they poured their resources and had their teams that actually went out, saw, and they actually knew that something incredibly, but they probably didn't know it to the magnitude of how big. So they poured all their resources and everything at that time to bring their best to meet the birth of the king. And how many people should have been aware of that? But they weren't paying attention.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine, creator of the Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age 2015 to 2035 video series. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. Today I have Demetrius Leach, Spencer Heston, and Christopher Leach, intertwining 3,500-year interlooping cycles and biblical prophecy timelines into these massive earth changes that we're starting to see right now. And it's really interesting how all what was foretold thousands of years ago across cultures and religions pointing to this exact same time right now. So here we go.
Your date is with your jet streams, but it is also lining up. The midnight watch will end in 2024. And we are actually seeing extremely significant events that are happening in the political arena, which is lining up to what we have been speaking about where prophecy is concerned.
I'm using solar diagrams to see where the planets are lining up out there. And we get this special configuration that only happens once every 2,000 years. I shouldn't say exactly 2,000. The last time it lined up like this was 79 AD. Precise year, precise month of October. October of 79 AD, we're going to come into the same configuration again in 2024. But with as much infrastructure as we have around the world with roads and pipelines and bridges, it's going to create something called an ellipsoid Earth. Now, the Earth right now is what we consider sort of a sphere, a ball, if you will. There's going to be a second magnetic field tugging on our Earth in the outer solar system. And it's going to be very slight, so it should only affect maybe the top mile of the crust. But it should be enough to cause an enormous amount of earthquakes, landslides, mud, volcano events, and this type of earth cracks, sinkholes. How do you think that would affect us? We would lose our infrastructure in the modern era, a lot of it. Not all, but a lot. How could we cope with that? We wouldn't be able to. And in addition, if the sun's magnetic field goes into a very low state, that would allow more space debris to come in. And yeah, it could be anything from a small granular size, like a piece of sand size of something coming in the atmosphere. But there's a blue comet coming through in 2022 in the winter solstice. So again, a very strange timing. The perihelion of this comet, it's called K2 2017C. And it was the furthest away from the sun interacting comet ever recorded. And it was about a 20x difference than the furthest ever recorded comet to come into our solar system that started to interact with the sun, where it started to glow. And that's how they saw this thing. But it wasn't double the distance or triple the distance of the furthest one before. It was 20x further out. And this is going to be blue. And it's going to be large enough that in the middle of the day, it's going to be the size of the full moon, visible in the day, both hemispheres, blue. But in the evening time, it's going to take up a portion of the sky. And this is going to be coming through in the winter solstice 2022, December 21st, at the apex or the perihelion, where it rounds the sun at the closest. And then as it's exiting out through the 2023 era, you can only imagine what kind of sign this will be in the skies. Because, they talk about signs in the skies, signs in the heavens, and I do believe we're going to start to see plasma displays where the petroglyphs on canyon walls are going to start to form in the skies again. Because the ancients, you got to go back. I mean, we've lived through this history of earth changes, let's say since the last 30,000 years. We got cave paintings, we got rock art and petroglyphs everywhere. That same array of shapes and things that were carved into the rocks are going to come to life in the skies again. So signs in the skies is going to be an understatement as we come through some of these things. But that's why I'm coming to a lot of my conclusions here. It's not really dreams that I've had. It's more using the science of cycles and seeing magnetic fields and how these planets are lining up and what they do when two magnetic fields interact on each other. And I'll say one last thing. This second magnetic field forming in the outer solar system is going to be comprised of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And if you think about that, to the Earth, it's only Mars and then the Earth. And we're only going to be the second planet away from that second smaller magnetic field. And we'll have the sun stepping down very low in its activity, and we're going to be the third planet away. So we're going to have two magnetic fields overlooping right here where the Earth is in our orbit. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens magnetically, how people are going to behave with their brains, with the magnetism in the brain. And there's a lot of changes coming, but, like you say, it's all been talked about and described before as to what to expect with these changes coming here. So I don't know if that pinged on something like before with the dates or something that I just talked about for possible changes that you could relate to that you've seen in the prophecies.
Yes. You are seeing a lot in the heavens, and we are also told, Christ says that you can read the heavens. Seeing these things, then, they are not for the purpose mainly for just for our understanding in knowing what is happening, but it is supposed to give us a cue as to what God is about to do and when. Because he says, when you shall see all of these things happening, know that it is near. Know that what is near. I'm going to read Matthew 24, and it says in from verses, and you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, but the end is not yet. Nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, what you spoke about, pestilences, earthquakes. Why would there be these things? And you know that the outer forces of the planets also affect our Earth. So there are going to be these things that are going on. And why are these things going on? It all has to do also with how man is relating to his God, because God is the one who created them in the first place, and he has everything in a delicate balance. And we need for him to be constantly present for these things that are delicately balanced to remain intact. But when we push away God by our sin, then what happens is that these things go out of order. So you are seeing certain cycles that are happening, and they're going to completely continue to repeat themselves because man is pushing away God. So he says, then, notice what in verse 8, all these things are the beginning of sorrows, then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted. And you talk about when people begin to get hungry, what will they do? So he says, all nations, there's going to be a conglomerate of all of the nations coming together because they're going to have one mind. They're going to have one mode of survival. They're going to believe that it is the earth and the economy and the governments and the religionists and the scientists and that they can depend upon, when in fact their dependence must be upon Jehovah Jireh, God himself. And this is what God is trying to teach us as showing you these things. He wants to divert your mind to be exclusively dependent upon him and not upon the things of this world. So even knowing what is going to happen, and he's giving you some great insights into what is going to take place in a scientific realm, when these people begin to get angry for they're not going to have food, and they're going to come to recognize, hey, David Dubain has a place down there with some food, they're going to come and rip you apart and take away your food. You're going to need the very presence of God, like a wall of fire, to be protecting you from the passions of men when they're let loose. So I think that you are onto something, and it is good in understanding from your direction what prophecy is actually saying. It is lining up. We are right there. The only thing now is to have your complete repose in God himself to be the one, and he got to be the center now. You have to use this to bring people, not to let them think that, hey, these things are actually happening and we have to run to Arizona or we have to run to someplace else. We have to run to God, because if you are in the middle of the city and you have God, you're protected. That is the point that would like to hear coming out of these studies, because they are understanding what you're seeing in the heavens, but it must have an end. And the end must not be that people must depend upon the earth to provide for them, because when people get hungry, don't think that you can keep food away from them. They're going to, if they realize that you have food down there, they're going to come for you.
Yeah, and that's the thing where, you can take food from somebody, but then you run out of the food and then you just need to go take more food again. Or you can work with a community of people you trust, and then in that same thing, you're finding the same spirit of God and in yourself within the other people that you're respecting enough to work with them, to find that cohesion of spirit between the community, that we all exist in the same light vibration and we want to continue, versus coming in with the marauding attitude of, you're just a thing, you're in my way, you're in the way of my food, I'm going to steal your food, instead of finding and seeing the divine spark inside the other human that's next to you, helping you, sharing skills with you, sharing skills in the community to allow you to survive another day in an abundant, fruitful way, versus that whole lack and scarcity mentality that seems to be taught to us since birth here. And with that divine spark is that base layer of creation that's within everything and runs and is the base layer of all that we know.
No, but that is the ideal. The ideal is for everyone to have that divine spirit within them so that they can have love one for another. But that is not reality. It is idealism. It is the ideal, but it is not reality, because it's way down within the human heart is that core of selfishness. I saw on a number of occasions, many people sought to have their communes where their little communities, and it is just constantly disrupted. Why? Because of the heart of man. The Bible itself says it correctly. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So we need God to be in control. And the only time that we're going to find that real utopia where everybody will be of that same spirit is what we call the earth made new. The earth made new is when everybody's mind is completely absorbed. All those globally, everybody's mind completely absorbed in love with God and with each other. That is not going to happen on this side, because there is also a being that is referred to as the enemy, Satan himself. He's not just a force, and he knows what he's about, and he's capable of whispering things to our minds. So it is a good thought. However, it can only occur within the context of what we refer to as redemption, the redemptive process for man, and bringing him to back to a point where he is completely surrendered to his creator. Satan suggested we can have such a mind, we can have such an environment, we can have such a disposition without God. And it is being proven over and over again from society to society that it cannot happen. They have tried it for thousands of years. It have not happened. You never had a society that could run on just the human machinery seeking to make things good. America can't even get it done. Have good ideals, but they can't get it done.
Well, it sounds like a full divergence and a full separation into a new dimension where we might hold some physicality in the earth, but the physical realm, as you talk about, in the human imperfect thought process and heart, would have to come into an interdimensional rifting into a separate Earth almost, where the rules would be different, where we wouldn't need sustenance, we wouldn't need food, our bodies wouldn't experience heat or cold. It would come into an energetic realm, shall we say, not in death. And I want to state that not everybody died, but in the rifting of a dimension into a lighter vibration form is kind of what it sounds like, because I think that's the only way it could go. And some people have talked about this splitting Earth, where the heavier, denser energies and thoughts and emotions have a density to them. They have a vibration with them. And there would be a separation, literally, of thought and form into a lighter quickening of vibration. But it's still in a physical realm, yet there's different rules, and the mind in the person would behave differently, because that lack and scarcity wouldn't be there if you didn't need as much food to eat, or if you didn't get cold, if you didn't have to have all these things that we need just for basic life. That would completely change the diametric of how humans would behave with each other. So that's the only way I could see that would be possible, is if we really split into two dimensional realms and moved forward that way.
Okay, well, there's a thought here from 2 Peter chapter 3. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise. Where the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. We, according to his promise, look for a new heaven and new earth. So the thought is, you are using different language and different terminology, but I'm going to put it, I believe, in the same concept in a different way. I would say this way, that this world, in this dimensional situation, it is going to dissolve. What is going to happen? The more we drift away from God, the more we drift away from life, we cannot sustain ourselves. But I'm thankful that there is a super intelligent mind that is above all of this, that is still in control. This earth is not, and this universe is not floating around based on unintelligible substances. There is design, intelligent design, and there is an entity out there that is above, one that's called the maker of the universe, the designer of the universe, and he's above the universe, and he will make all things right. And we must cooperate with him, and he will create a new heaven and new earth. So the reality of a divine being, which is not just divine substance, but divine being with a divine mind, with absolute intelligence, I believe that if we subscribe to him and submit to him, we will find ourselves in that particular dimension of which you are speaking.
Yeah, and it does bring me to the point again, these magnetic field loopings on top of the earth, these two magnetic fields, we just don't know what's going to happen. And if this is going to cause that disillusion or that dissolving of what we know in this like hard third dimension, that there could be a different set of a split would happen instantly, and he would just out on the other side. And those who were resonating and, in the Christ consciousness, or following that vibration of consciousness of love and light, those are the ones that are on the next earth that split off. And I wouldn't say like splitting of a cell. That doesn't really, it's sort of like, that's too basic and rudimentary. It doesn't really make sense, a splitting of a cell, but that's the closest thing people would understand. But there would be a denser medium of rock and earth, but then there would be a spiritual light body kind of planet, different, that does split off. And I'm wondering how often this occurs, because, like you say, we're not just a bunch of gas and planets and stars floating around out here. There's definitely intelligent design behind it in the entire base construct of consciousness that's holding it together in a pattern of frequency, light, and vibration. And, the Bible's ridden with things about vibrational references, as well as references to light. The energies, the vibrations, the thoughts, these are all energy patterns as well. So it does match up that something magnificent, massive. And I'm also wondering, with the media and the governments, if they're trying to push you into this sort of dark vibration realm where they're trying to, on purpose, let you not get into this Christ consciousness or the vibration field of the Creator, to keep you locked on this planet versus allowing this split. Because I believe that where you are in your mind, and what your resonance is and what you're feeling with your emotion. Are you broadcasting love and light? Or are you broadcasting murder, hate, and torture? That's way two different realms of where you're going to be going in this split. And it depends where you would be, how you're vibrating on when you talk about this new earth being formed, split, transversing, whatever words you want to use. I don't think we even have words to describe what it would be. But I think 2024 is going to be it here for at least the beginning of it.
Well, I think that you're right. We were actually into the beginning of the end.
So hey, on my end, I have a few questions, and interesting enough, when it goes into that transfiguration, that exchange, in Noah's flood time frame, it had not rained on the earth as of yet, so that atmosphere provided the dew that allowed that life to go through. So when he had said that, hey, there's going to be a large flood that happened, people didn't want anything to do with the Creator, and so he said, okay, you don't want my protection anymore, no problem, I love you, but nonetheless, he was given instruction, Noah anyway, to build an ark that had room for lots of people. Only a few actually listened, got in, and then they were given what they wanted, and that was the letting go of God's protection. And the atmosphere retained all of that moisture. So the flood was the result, to my understanding, is the releasing of what was held in that atmosphere. So about 4,000 years ago, that's when that event took place. And then we were told that the sign of the rainbow, with that the flood, they will never have a flood like that again. The next thing is then you see the situation of Sodom and Gomorrah. And around that area was a lot of geology of not wanting God's protection. Things went really off the deep end of intermingling. Also, interestingly enough, in the days of Noah, just like when Jesus said, just like in the days of Noah, they were doing some hybrid science weaving stuff that they shouldn't be intermingling. So then you fast forward to Sodom and Gomorrah, a similar thing. And this one's really interesting because this is a whole topic of itself, but it was said that eternal fire was what Sodom and Gomorrah, but that's not burning right now. So we see that eternal fire in terms of eternal damnation, so to speak, is only the equivalent until that fuel source is burnt out. So this helps get into the category of the immortality of the soul. So a person who's going to be tortured forever in hellfire, when you really get into it, it would be more of a miracle to have a mortal soul be separate from the life source for the purpose of being tortured. Would be like a double miracle. That helps really go down the pathway of, well, and when going forward to our time frame, when things are made new, it said, well, it won't be by flood, but what are we covered with? Well, we have a lot of lava, molten activity underneath. When those certain sources, let's say these geomagnetic poles, are lining up these shifts, then that transfiguration of those that are raised in Christ to go into a new life form, then the earth being made new is similar to the days of Noah. Well, it's just a simple cause and effect. Earth made new by fire, which was underneath. And then that new life form kind of gives us a clue as a new existence that's available to those that carry on into the end. But then on the time frames, David, you said that within was it the Wheeler's drought clock cycle, within the sequences? Because if we're looking at about 4,000 years ago, what type of event are you seeing going back if you were going to say, well, Noah's flood's a pretty big one to go backwards? And what are we going towards that, just so we can have an equivalent to the magnitude of going forward?
The flood, at least, research put about 4,100 years ago. That matches pretty much what you said, even 4,000. So, 100-year difference on, 4,000 years of time. Nothing's exact, going back, unless you can find the start date and then, how many times has the calendar been changed in these last few thousand years of what we're using as a base reference to work our way back in time. So about 4,100 years ago, that coincides with a massive downshift in terms of temperature on the planet of about 3.5 degrees Celsius. Because the 8.2 K, and this is another interesting thing, There was another dropout in temperature where temperatures on the Earth dropped about between 8 to 10 degrees Celsius 8,200 years ago, and they call it the 8.2K, as in 1,000, event. But then the Noah flood 4,100 years ago. And then we bring it up to right now, would be right on that same cycle. So if we're going 82, 41 today. And I don't know if it's a step down, because the 8.2K seemed to wipe humanity back to 10 million human breeding pairs, if you want to call them, and in a way to refer it as like how many people were on the planet. 10 million male-female pairs that could breed and then continue to have children to move forward off the next generation. So whatever was up to that point of however many hundreds of millions were from the exit of the last ice age in the Younger Dryas era, the collapse of it dropped 20 degrees Celsius for 1,000 years. And then suddenly the temperatures rose again. Humanity kind of reformed itself from, say, 10,300 years ago up until like 8,200 years ago, and the temperature dropped out, and wham, they just got knocked back. For whatever population over those several thousand years occurred, they went back to less than 10 million people on the planet. And then 4,100 years ago, whoosh, we got knocked out again to just how many? A handful of people that are still left. So what's it going to bring us to this time? Because the cycle seems to be more ferocious. And if we are stepping into a new ice age, you would expect this one to be just the mother of all drop-offs and resets, because if we're stepping into a new ice age, we're talking about another 90,000 years of ice and complete 30 degrees Fahrenheit cooler temperatures across the planet. Everything ends at that point. If we drop off into one of these cooling events right now, would it usher in? Absolutely. There would be so many electrical changes coming. It seems that it's on this correct timeline, and it seems energetically correct for shifts, changes, jumps, evolutionary leaps. I hate to use that word, evolutionary leaps. When the electromagnetic field and the plasma field and the magnetics change heavily enough with cosmic ray bombardment, different species seem to pop out of nowhere. And it's not like, I hate that word evolution because I just don't believe in that. Oh, next generation, there's a 3-toed turtle, and the next generation, there's a 5-toed turtle. I just don't believe that at all. But these gigantic leaps in terms of new species that pop out because of the overlapping of all these extremes happening at the same time. Through geologic history, they're on a clock as well. And then we seem to be jumping right into another one of these. Everything's coming together now. We're talking like millions of year cycles coming right on top of the 100,000 year cycles, in top of the 25,000 year cycles, in the 10,000 year cycles, the 4,000 year cycles, the 2,000, the 1,000, the 50, the 200. They're all lining up right now in these next few years. It's quite interesting where we sit. This is literally like once in a couple million year event we're about to experience right now, if you wanted to put it in that context versus a 4,100 year event.
So really the magnitude of what that is, almost not since creation could something even come close to what we will probably be experiencing within this decade up into 2030, 2031 on the max. It's going to be probably one of the biggest overhauls planet Earth since it started. I mean, that's what everything's pointing to my understanding, and how it's paralleling within the generation concept, and also on the science side, the numbers are lining up. It makes me think of the wise men in those time frames who were deeply studying, 3 wise men, under who were in their Magi clan, that they saw, and they were using so many different systems, and they saw, wow, you know what, there's something incredibly large that is happening. And they poured their resources and had their teams that actually went out, saw, and they actually knew that something incredibly, but they probably didn't know it to the magnitude of how big. So they poured all their resources and everything at that time to bring their best to meet the birth of the king. And how many people should have been aware of that, but they weren't paying attention? It's almost like the writing is on the wall of when we have this great reset underway. Well, there's a bigger great reset that will look like what these people and what they try to control in their great reset will make it look like nothing. And on the other side is definitely that different existence, that transfiguration into a different being.